how to approach introduction and literature review of writing a scientific paper. And this is what I believe should be the objective. However, I want to point out that, as Professor Sota said in his during his presentation, much of what will be expected at this level is for people who are working on original research papers, and I have prepared my presentation with that in mind. So much of what we are going to see or hear from me is how to approach writing the introduction section of an original research paper. One of the first keywords to start with the introduction, having heard the wonderful presentation on titles and abstracts, is you begin the introduction by clearly identifying the subject area of interest. And Professor mentioned keywords that you have to identify in your abstract and that should be related to your title. So using keywords from the title in the first few sentences of the introduction is key, because it helps to focus the reader to the primary subject without losing focus. So if you are writing a paper that deals with human behavior and there is human behavior in the title of the manuscript, within the first one or two sentences of the introduction, the behavior should appear in your sentence. So the introductory paragraph should usually set the context in which the research you describe was carried out. And it is usually best that it catches the attention of the reader. Once you lose the reader in your introductory paper or the introduction section of your paper, it's not more likely that they will go through it. And similarly, during the review process, if you are not able to catch the attention of the reviewer very early, it's likely that he might not give a positive review. In general, studies on many journals have shown that there are four main kinds of opening sentence, how you want to introduce the title or the topic of your research. And usually, this can be defined either as you refer to the historical context around that topic or issue, or you give a mini review or seminar as your opening sentence, or you use a gloom and doom approach, highlighting the challenge of how big the problem is, or you mention that this is new and exciting. I'll go ahead and give some examples. Okay, so the historical opening is one of the most common and tells the reader the current situation in relation to the past events. For example, if you are doing a study that has to do with the use of artemisinin-based combination therapy for the treatment of malaria, you can start the sentence by saying, because of its low cost, ease of use, safety, and efficacy, ACTs have been the mainstay of treatment for malaria in Africa in recent times. Everything you said here is a fact, and it doesn't really change much, because this is the historical thing that, on the average, everybody who is working on research involving malaria therapy will know, especially in the context of Africa and many countries in general. Then another one is to use the mini review approach, where you present a sentence on the major characteristics of a particular disease. For example, you are doing a work on schistosomiasis. You can begin by saying schistosomiasis is a waterborne, water snail transmitted helminth infection of the intestinal or urinary tract that is prevalent in the tropics and responsible for a lot of morbidity, especially in children. So this is a mini review or a seminar opening of a paper related to schistosomiasis. Then the gloom and doom approach is a sentence which describes how big or bad the problem is. For example, you can say malaria kills 20 million people every year. The one that commonly used in tuberculosis is tuberculosis kills more than 500,000 people a year, and is equivalent to 14 fighter jets or 14 aircraft crashing every day. So it just gives a gloom or doom picture about the topic you are presenting, why you think is important. So, for example, in this case, foodborne infection affects up to 76 million people and leads to 300,000 hospitalization and 5,000 deaths annually in the US. Then the last part of it is to talk about the new and exciting or new and interesting. You know that when COVID-19 came out, anything you wrote that was written about COVID-19 was published. whether it was correct or not. That is why in recent times it has accredited almost the highest number of retractions, because many of the things that were written during that period, some of them were not right. For example, since the 2020, concerns have grown regarding emerging infectious diseases caused by SARS coronavirus and their variants due to their pandemic potential. So this is something that is new and is interesting, and because we have seen how COVID-19 could be a pandemic, it happened, and I believe many of us saw it happen during our time. And so if there are new variants of COVID-19, we don't take it that it might not come to us, because it came and eventually led to lockdown, and many people, quite a reasonable number of persons, lost their life, even though the mortality rates were lower in our part of the world. So for writing for international journals generally, it's important to note that the historical context and the mini review are the most common approaches to begin the introduction section, although there are a few interesting variations to this pattern. But if you are writing for some journals like the Lancet, they prefer the Gloom, and many tropical journals that have to do with diseases of the tropics, talking about Tropical Doctor, Tropical Medicine and International Health, Tropical Medicine and Health. So many tropical medicine journals, they like papers that begin with the gloom and doom picture. Then for new and interesting, obviously, is journals that deal with emerging infectious diseases, Lassa, Ebola, all these diseases that can lead to either epidemic or pandemic potential are things that are the most likely favored, such as emerging infectious diseases. So one of the things I want us to know is that it's not usually good to say tuberculosis is a major health problem or is an important, very important or serious disease. It doesn't communicate anything. And some of us, that's how we present, we start the introduction of most of our papers, saying something is serious, very important, or a major health problem. You've not really communicated any major issue as far as that condition is concerned. So it's better to state the magnitude of the problem in terms of numbers, how many people are involved, which population groups, which geographical areas, is it issues that have to do with cost, or use a measurable characteristics related to that problem to describe it. That way you can communicate something that, because if you say tuberculosis is a major, there are many countries that have very low incidence of TB. You say malaria is a major problem or is a serious disease. There are many countries that don't even have, when there is a case of malaria, is celebrated because of the low incidence of malaria in those countries. So let us frame the magnitude of the problem in relation to the characteristics that are important in terms of the number, the population groups, the geographical area, or use a measurable characteristics to do that. So following that setting of your research, I think the next thing is to refer to recent papers. So most of the papers that we are supposed to cite in doing the literature review, it's expected that before you write the introduction section, you should be fairly versed with the area of with that research area or research topic in terms of the recent studies that have been found, what were the positive findings, what were the negative findings, what were the controversies, especially in the context of the area where you are doing the research. So in general, it is recommended that we should stick to references that are less 10 years or less. In fact, some journals actually ask for 5 years, some ask for 2 years, to tell you how they are, especially those that are trying to build their impact factor, their Thomson Reuters impact factor. They want more recent journals because it is part of what is used in calculating. Citations of more recent publications is useful in calculating the impact factor of the journal. So in general, imagine the introduction section to consist of about 4 different paragraphs. It might be up to 5 in some papers, especially papers that have to do with molecular studies or micro or laboratory-based studies. So give a background information about the first paragraph. Should focus on the background information, and sometimes you hear issues like statement of the problem, then the current state of knowledge. What have we found, or what is interesting about this area that you are working on, or this disease, or this topic, or this title that you are working on? Then what information is missing? What are the gaps that exist? Or what are the controversies? if two studies have been done in Nigeria on that topic, one had a positive result, one had a negative result. So why it might be important to Nigerians is that it's no longer clear what direction or we're assuming we are trying two treatments, and one of them showed that patients who received the treatment improved in Nigeria, while another study showed there was no improvement. Your study might be a tiebreaker to say, because of these differences in findings, there are still controversies on whether this medication will be useful for Nigerians or not. And that is what can give a context on why the study is important. And the fourth paragraph should describe the research question you want to investigate. So issues like research question, objectives, hypotheses, these are all they are framed almost around the same topic, because if the objectives can be to describe the prevalence, to determine the prevalence of a disease, you can frame it as what is the prevalence, and that is the research question. And then the hypothesis will be that there is no difference in prevalence between A or B. So the fourth paragraph should focus on the research objectives or the research question. Then, like I said, for laboratory-based studies, sometimes they also provide a brief description of how their study have prepared to answer that question. So, for example, a study of a new technique to detect early infections or with malaria in children might provide, the first paragraph will describe the prevalence and significance of malaria in children in a global context and also in your local context, using a gloom and doom stats, as I mentioned earlier on, describing the prevalence of the disease, morbidity, mortality, hospitalization, and hospitalization and the mortality from it. Then the second paragraph might describe the different approaches to diagnose malaria and the problem of using these methods. For example, when we were using the thick and thin film in making diagnosis of malaria, for example, the results were not quite very fast and not intuitive compared to the use of the malaria additives we have now or we use now. And sometimes they were also not useful in detecting the different strains of malaria. But there are malaria additives that can go as far as telling you the strain of the malaria parasite that is detected based on the rapid diagnostic test kit. Then the third paragraph will focus on if there is a new technique, for example, the RDT we talked about, and why it may be an improvement over the previous methods that were being used in diagnosing it. And then the fourth paragraph will be the objectives of the study. Your study will now describe the diagnostic utility of a new kit in diagnosing malaria in children compared to the existing kit. Then I mentioned that in lab-based studies, they might also describe what they did as far as they need to carry out a well-designed, well-controlled study in children, particularly in the context of their potential for early detection of malaria. So, in summary, generally, the first paragraph should talk about the context of the work to describe what has been done, describe what has been done or published before you. Sometimes you hear it as some people say they are talking about the background or statement of the problem. Then you talk about what is missing or what is missing based on this current knowledge about this topic. And you hear it, some people may call it the rationale, explain why the study is being conducted. Then what does the study add? So that's what sometimes you hear as justification, which explains why the study is important and the value it adds. It might be that it's been done in a different setting. We are using a different technique that will improve early detection. And then always note that if you are quoting studies that have been done by others, use your own words to summarize their findings and give a reference. Don't plagiarize, because that is one of the biggest challenges for people who are starting out in writing. You will find a sentence very interesting, copy it without rephrasing it, and also citing, because if you have to rephrase and then cite the source of that sentence. That you rephrase it doesn't make it your own. The whole idea came from somewhere, and that is someone's idea that you need to cite. So, like I said, it's important to use the word objective or aim or question or hypothesis. Just use one of them. I think It's only in thesis that you might be asked to provide each of them, just to clarify that you understand what you are working on. But for writing a paper, it's important to keep it short and simple. Keep it very short, keep it short and simple. So you have to use either the word objective, question or problem you've investigated, and why is it important. So those are the basic structure of the introduction section of the. So do not include very lengthy explanation or discussion. Remember that I know that we mentioned introduction and literature review. It doesn't mean that you come and spend here discussing more than 100 or 10, 20, 30 literatures that has been reviewed in this, that has been conducted in this area. No, just highlight the controversies in the literature, highlight what the direction most of them have shown, and why there are still gaps that we want to address. If all of them have shown that a particular treatment works, it's possible that there is a particular group of individuals that there are case reports that this treatment don't work. That will be your basis for your work if you want to work in that particular group, to show whether truly these case reports can be verified in a larger study that this treatment doesn't work for this particular group of individuals. And that might be your key to why, or the overall rationale or justification of why you are conducting the study. So the literature review part of the introduction section is not something that should be lengthy, but it's something that you should have done. In fact, it's even important if you are doing it as part of your thesis that you have done a detailed literature review, identified the key findings, the key controversies, and it's on the basis of that you frame your own research question, the research title or the study, the objective you are going to work on. So don't do specific lengthy discussion of references or discuss techniques or protocol here. These are for the method section. So for literature search, one of the commonest sites that I would recommend, and that is where many people start with, because there's a lot of free abstracts, summary abstract of the papers that you can access, is the PubMed. I've provided the website there. Some of you, or you can just Google PubMed on Google, and it will take you to the link where you can search for keywords, search for authors, search for titles of papers that are related to what you are working on. It can give you fairly a good amount of both the title and abstracts of your study, of studies related to what you are working on. And there are also some free papers that you can maybe do to access through the PubMed platform. So just basically, when you are trying to work on the literature review, because like I mentioned, the introduction section is not a place for a detailed literature review. It's expected that this must have been done before you started working on your paper, before you started working on that title, that it's important to research on this title because of this and this and these gaps, and because of controversies that are existing in the literature. But if you are doing a literature search in that area, it's usually good to create a table like this, mention the author, the year, highlight the country and setting, what did they find, how did they approach, what methods did they use, and what were their main results. This can help you in writing a literature review as part of your thesis, or as part of your early part of demonstrating competence in that subject area. You have done a fairly good literature review, and these are the findings, and it's on the basis of these findings that you are able to frame your research topics and your research question, which you are now working on. So I have last question just for a comment. What are the most common opening sentence or sentences that set the context for most international journals? You can give your answer in the comment section. And then thank you very much.